What's going on, guys? Welcome to the GuitarLessons.com live show. As you can see, I'm joined by a very special guest, Jacob Wiens. What's going on, man?
Hey, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. So, Jake, maybe you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, your playing experience, stuff like that?
Happily, sure. So, again, my name is Jake. I'm a freelance guitar player living in Toronto, although originally I'm actually from BC. Andrew and I grew up together.
We did.
Mm-hmm. I've been playing guitar for a number of years, I think probably 16 years or so now.
Long time.
My educational background, I guess, is that I finished a degree in music performance at McGill a few years ago, and then just recently finished a master's degree in music theory there as well. I mostly play, because my education there was in the jazz program, I mostly play a lot of jazz or music that involves improvisation of some kind.
Right.
And that's mostly what I think I'll be talking about today.
Yeah, that's right. If you guys didn't check out the lesson title before, it's Practicing with Improvisation. And we just finished a full-on series on this. Jake just did for us, and a couple of YouTube videos as well. It's pretty awesome. And something that we kind of talked about before was, it sounds really advanced, but it's more like even a beginner could take it and maybe apply it too. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'll explain more in the live lesson now.
Yep.
But just beforehand, as Andrew said, some of the exercises are kind of strenuous or a little difficult,
Yep.
maybe a little mentally, conceptually challenging. But once you have kind of the concept, the framework worked out, you can really apply it to anything that you want to learn. So in this lesson, well, not in this lesson series, excuse me, in the lesson series we did, and in the live lesson today, we'll apply it to scales and arpeggios. But you can seriously apply it to any other type of scale, not just the one we do today, or any other type of arpeggio, to meet both your needs where you're at and where you want to go, especially.
Right. Very cool. So for those of you guys who are Academy members, get your questions in, questions tab below the video player. We will have a little bit of time for Q&A. So if you have any questions for Jake, it can be about what we talk about today. It can be about anything else we'll also talk about. Everything's fair game. And also, we do have a PDF download available for everybody who's watching the lesson. And that is basically just going to give you the tabs and sheet music for the scale shapes / exercises / arpeggios that you'll be doing. And also, we're going to be giving away a little something a little bit later too. So be listening and be on the lookout for that. Okay, do you want to take it away and just start teaching stuff?
Absolutely.
Cool.
Okay, so the concept we referred to earlier, the thing you need to get figured out first, as it were, that you can apply to anything, is just made of two parts. And then both parts are a kind of limit, or what I call a constraint that you set in place for yourself. And then that limits the amount of options in the exercise, so it makes new ideas kind of approachable or feasible. And the two types of limits are a physical limit, that'll probably have something to do with your left and right hand or the fretboard, and a musical limit, which is more simply just what you're going to play, what is it you want to work on. So quickly, I mean, an example of just the concept would be something like if you wanted to improve the dexterity of your pinky finger, you might decide to play the melody to a song that you know already, but just with your pinky finger. In doing so, you've constrained yourself to just use your pinky, which is a physical constraint, and musically you're limiting yourself to just the melody. You may already know that melody, but you probably don't know how to play that melody with just your pinky finger. Mm-hmm. So you kind of set up an improvisational scenario where you have to figure out sort of on the spot how to complete the exercise. So there are, as Andrew said, a few graphics that have tabs and sheet music that accompany each of these lessons, but they're fairly minimal. I hope you can forgive me for that, but that's kind of the point. Once you get one of them down, the idea is to sit down with just the framework ahead of time, and then on your own kind of step out into the exercise and make it for yourself as you're going. So that's the sort of improvisational aspect here.
Okay.
So my first example is how to use constraints, both musical and physical, when practicing scales. The first example I'll do is actually the constraint that will run the course of the scale section isn't using your pinky finger, like that last example, but using a certain fixed number of notes per string. So for example, you could say to yourself, I want to play a G major scale. Maybe you don't know it yet, or it's the one scale you're comfortable with. But, excuse me.
No problem.
You want to set out to improve it. So you say to yourself, I'm going to play a G major scale starting on the lowest available note in G major on the guitar, which we'll just refresh our memory quickly. G major has 7 notes, G, A, B, C, D, E, and F sharp. And of those 7 notes, the lowest available on the guitar is our low E string. So the rules that I set up for myself are I'm going to play the G major scale with 3 notes per string, and I'm going to start on the lowest available note.
Now, one thing I just want to interject quickly. In the example, you were doing C major. Is there a reason you
that's
want to
true.
jump over to G major, or would you rather do C major in this case? It's totally up to you.
I actually was just thinking in the key of that initial song, backing track. So,
Yeah.
we'll switch to C major.
Just to keep it congruent with
Absolutely,
the...
yeah. So what Andrew means is that the graphic you're about to see, which is 3 notes per string, C major, is in the key of C. So we're going to keep it continuous with the illustration.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, so that just sounds like this. Okay, so that's simple enough, and you may already know that kind of scale, shape, or thing. But the potency of this particular physical constraint, musical constraint paradigm, is using it over the course of the fretboard. So doing it kind of exhaustively. So the next step in this process is to do the exact same thing, but starting on the next lowest note in C major, which in this case is F. So I'll do the exact same thing. I'm going to play a C major scale, starting on an F, and I'm going to play 3 notes per string. That'll sound like this. And then the idea would be to continue this process until you run out of fretboard. So that might take me a little bit. I'll do a couple more passes so you get the idea of it. But I probably won't go the whole way. So that's starting on a low G. Then I move up to an A, the next note in C major. Then up to a B. And then my next note would be C. I'll stop there just for the sake of brevity. But the idea, again, would be to do this on all the available notes on the low E string until you get up to this high D, probably, and then you could come back down. One little variation that I'll just mention on this particular exercise that we cover in more detail in the lesson series is that you can connect these kind of pathways that you form one to another. The process is pretty simple, but basically you just want to add 1 note in the direction that you want to go. So I'll just give one quick example of that. So starting on the low E again, C major, 3 notes per string. So I add a 4th note on this string. Then I add a 4th note on this string going up. So I'll leave it at that, but you can imagine that you can connect each of these kind of scale pathways one to another with that same process.
Very cool.
Okay. Is that enough for 3 notes per string, do you think?
I think so. Let's move on. Yeah.
Okay, so the next variation on this exercise is just to change the number of notes per string. You can do all the same variants that we just talked about where you connect them one to another and that kind of stuff. So I'll leave that out of the 2 notes per string example. But one thing to note about 2 notes per string is that the interval you'll create on the string, so my first 2 notes, for instance, is always going to be less than the distance between adjacent string pairs, which means my hand is interestingly going to move this way when I ascend the scale, and it's going to move this way when I descend the scale, which is a little counterintuitive for guitarists, but that makes it kind of fun and difficult, and if you find difficult things fun. But okay, so that would sound like this. Whoop, excuse me. I'm going to start on the root of the scale this time, rather than the lowest position, because I'm anticipating my hand moving this way. So starting on a low C, it sounds like this. And then just as in 3 notes per string, the next step would be to go up to the next available note in that key. Quickly, that would sound like this, starting on a D. And you continue that on right until you run out of frets, And then if you want another variation, just as I said, is to kind of attach these pathways to another, ascend up one, descend on the other. Lastly, that we cover in the lesson series in more detail again, is doing the same thing with 4 notes per string. So I'll start on a low E string because just as 2 notes per string made us go this way, 4 notes is actually going to make us go this way really fast. Yeah. So we'll start on the low E string, which is because that note is available in C major, just as in our earlier example. So the game that you're setting up for yourself is play a C major scale starting on the low E string with 4 notes per string. That sounds like this. And just a quick note about the whole scalar exercises, all 3 of them. You'll notice that there is not an emphasis on memorizing the shape so much, but there is this focus on learning the notes in the scale. Right. So that is, that's an emphasis in these exercises that can't really be avoided. And in fact, that's kind of the purpose. It's to create this kind of physical metric or constraint that forces you to do things you might not. And in doing so, you learn where everything sits on the board. Okay. So they are difficult, some of these exercises. Yeah. But they honestly will exhaust, for instance, after doing 2, 3, and 4 notes per string on the guitar. In that way, you would know where every single note in C major is on the guitar. Yeah. Which is, I think, a powerful
I would absolutely
bit of knowledge or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, for sure. Okay, well, do you want to just keep trucking, keep moving on through?
Sure,
to the next
to the arpeggio exercise?
Yeah, why not?
Okay, so now if we step back a bit to that conceptual framework, we had talked about musical and physical constraints. In the last scenario, our musical constraint was a scale. Our physical constraint was the number of notes per string. Now, I want to apply that same idea, this idea of constraints, to practicing arpeggios. Rather than give myself a number of notes per string, though, I'm going to choose a fret section, or a section of the fretboard, I should say. And it's going to be a 5-fret section. So, for instance, between 1 and 5, inclusively, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or you could go from 0 to 4, 2 to 6, that kind of thing. And then I'm going to give myself the task of arpeggiating that triad, whatever triad it might be, within that framework. And then just as we moved the scale up, the notes per string thing up through the scale and then up through the fretboard, here we're going to move that 5-note fret, 5-fret section, up 1 fret at a time. And this will similarly push us into playing this triad in ways that we weren't anticipating, and so we'll learn new ways to play it, that kind of thing. So the first example I'll do is between the 1st and 5th frets, and I'll just quickly arpeggiate a C major triad in that zone. It'll sound like this. For those who have looked at the graphic already or heard a possibility in there, maybe something wrong with my example, you may have noticed that I played C here, but I could have also played it here on the 1st fret. Both are kind of legal options in this game that I've set up for myself. So in this case, you can absolutely choose either of them. So the one I did, I chose this, but I could play it the other way, which would look like this. Sorry, I tried to make it emphasize it there, but kind of ended up screwing up. One more time, just to be clear. Yep. Also included in the graphic, there's a high C in parentheses. The reason I put that there is just to show that that would be out of bounds. So if we played that high C on the 8th fret, we've given ourselves this limit, 1 to 5. But if we can't reach that high C, so it would kind of break the rules of our game. So it would push you, instead of going up to C, you'd have to go back down to the next available note. Right, that makes sense. So that's just how the kind of almost arbitrary physical constraint pushes you and forces you to practice different things.
Okay, very cool, very cool.
So again, there's many ways to create variations on these ideas. Yep. The next step would be to push this 5-fret section up one fret and continue going. With one chord, though, the differences are very subtle. So I'm actually going to skip on to the next example, which is a sequence of chords. And there we'll see the effects of shifting this 5-fret section much more clearly. Okay, so the next example, as I mentioned, involves a sequence of chords rather than just one chord. So let's say the chords G major and C major. G major would have the notes G, B, D, C major the notes C, E, G. And I'll do the exact same kind of game with myself. I'll say I'm going to arpeggiate these chords between the 3rd and 7th frets. But I also have to, now that I have a sequence of chords, choose how long I want to play each chord. Rather than like a kind of arbitrary time in seconds duration, it's a lot easier just to pick the amount of notes you want to play of each. So in this case, I'll play 8 notes of G major and then 8 notes of C major. And I'll loop it a couple times, just like in the example. So quickly, one thing to point out about what happened here versus the other exercise where we had just one triad was that when I repeated the sequence, which is G, C, G, C, the actual arpeggio sequence was different. For instance, when I started on the low G. But when I got back to that G chord later, the note that was available for me was D. And so this kind of mismatch between the physical boundaries and the sequence of notes that you're playing, again, forces you to connect chords in ways that you might not have anticipated. So it's the same thing at work. It's that kind of physical constraint pushing your musical constraint choice into places where you wouldn't expect it to go, or you wouldn't normally go, maybe if you're thinking about a shape.
Okay, very cool. You have one more, right?
One more example.
Okay.
Just to nail this arpeggio idea home, I'll stick in the same section, 5-fret section, 3 to 7, and now I'm going to play a sequence of 4 chords. As I mentioned earlier, I enjoy playing jazz a lot, and this progression is a staple of jazz repertoire. It's probably the most common progression. The chords in question are C major 7, A minor 7, D minor 7, and G 7 or G dominant 7. So I'll do the same thing. I'll arpeggiate those chords within this frame, this 5-fret section, and I'll play each chord for a duration of 8 note values. And then I'll repeat the sequence over and over again. So again, that was 2 iterations of a 4-chord cycle. But when I got back to, say, the C major 7 chord the second time, the arpeggio that I played was still the notes of C major 7, but it was in a totally different place. So again, the physical constraint here is mismatched with the number of notes I'm playing, so it means that there's a lot of variety. You could keep looping that, and it would be really different for quite a long time. Sometimes when you move the 5-fret section up, it might repeat exactly after only 2 cycles through the chords. But that one, for instance, I would anticipate going on for quite a long time because a lot of notes are available in that section.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And then just, sorry,
no,
you there, Andrew?
Go for it.
Just to hit it home again, the important part of this process would be that after doing that, move your 5-fret section up 1 fret and then do the exact same musical thing. So that would be arpeggiating those chords.
Right.
And you continue moving that up, and it's going to force you to play things you wouldn't normally.
For sure. Very cool. Okay, so first thing I will mention, we are about to kind of jump into a Q&A. So if you guys do have questions, please make sure you submit them. We should be able to get to all, or hopefully most. But before we do that, something we wanted to start doing, Nate and I have been talking a lot, is kind of a weekly challenge and something that we can do where, hey, we do this live show every week. What can we give you so that you can go home, practice it, come back the next week, and feel like, hey, I've accomplished something. So I've asked Jake to come up with a weekly challenge. Can you think of one?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Keeping with the theme of the lesson so far, my challenge would be to consider the scale exercises that I just talked about. So if you know one major scale, say you know C major in one position, or you know even one scale shape, choose that key, and this week play it with 3 notes per string in every available position, just that we showed. And you don't need to do it in time with a metronome or something very fast. You can totally take your time and anticipate the next note, kind of count the frets and that kind of stuff.
Right.
But just doing that with 1 major scale, covering the whole fretboard with 3 notes per string, or you could do 2 or 4, but probably just for now pick 1. I think you'll see a great improvement in your fretboard kind of awareness or knowledge.
Yeah, it's very cool. I mean, this has even given me a lot to think about and stuff, because I think very differently when I look at the fretboard. I probably think more in shapes, whether that be like scale shapes or caged or whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very cool to see somebody else kind of taking a different approach where they're looking at notes and how it makes you approach things very differently and maybe more intentionally. It's very cool. Very, very cool. Okay, we're going to jump into questions. Yeah, we might as well just jump right in. Okay, so this one is from Catman. This one's a bit of a long one, so bear with me here. So, hi guys, Catman here again from Sizzling Phoenix. My music somewhat died 11 years ago when I lost my wife to a brain tumor. Wow, I'm sorry. That's brutal. As she was my audience when I played the guitar. I just joined your academy in hopes of helping me to rekindle that passion for playing I've had on and off for decades, as well as to improve and widen my skills. I'm a fair rhythm guitarist looking to form a band in the near future to play for fun and parties, but I need to shake off the dust and start practicing again. First question, what do you think of me using gorilla tips to help me practice longer, since I haven't developed calluses on my fingers yet? Are you familiar with gorilla tips?
I am not.
Okay, so they are basically things that you put on the ends of your fingers so that your fingertips don't hurt as bad.
Oh, interesting.
I will tell you right now, I don't know if you have an opinion on this, but it's probably not the best idea.
Mm-hmm.
I would say developing calluses or getting to the point even beyond calluses where you can play. I mean, I know you probably play more than I do, and I have no problem if I wanted to play for 8 hours in a day, and there's no issue, and you probably would want to just get to that point. I don't know. What do you think? Do you agree?
I agree, unless there's a scenario where you had a particularly kind of strong sensitivity in your fingertips or something like that, but I'm not aware of that existing.
There is one guy, and
yeah?
he's the guy who runs Scott's bass lessons. He's like the bigger bass lessons guy, and he wears a glove when he plays because he has a nerve issue at the ends of his fingers. If you don't have that, your best bet is going to be just to develop the calluses. I guess it's just developing calluses in my mind, right?
Yeah, and if it really does hurt quite a bit to play the guitar, I'm sure you guys have talked about this in your lessons already, there might be some work on your guitar that can be done to make it feel better.
True story.
For instance, I don't think my guitar, even for someone who's never played it before, I don't think someone would play it and find that it hurts their hands.
Right, and that's just because it has such low action. Is that
yeah,
right?
I play a particularly low action on this guitar.
And one thing that I've noticed, and I saw a couple of people mentioning it, is you have a very light touch. You pick very, very lightly, and that's one of the reasons probably why you can have such low action. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
If I played different types of music or just had a much stronger attack with my right hand, I would get a lot more buzzing and that kind of stuff. So.
Right, which is something you want to avoid. But yeah, as Nate and I have kind of always said, like the best thing you can do if you feel like your guitar is giving you some specific trouble is just go take it to a pro and get them to set it up. You can learn the setup techniques yourself. We actually did a live lesson way back. One of our first ones, probably in the first 10 or so, and we had, I think his name was Steve Brandt. Something like that, and he came out and he's like a pro. That's what he does, is his job, and he kind of did a full walkthrough. So dig back through the lessons, the live lessons, and definitely check that one out because it's really helpful if you want to do that stuff yourself. Because I think a setup can cost anywhere from $50 to $100 depending on where you live, and that can sometimes be a little bit brutal. But that's definitely good advice. And then a second question from Catman as well. Do you have some tips on how to find fellow musicians over 50 who want to jam like me? Thanks, guys, for your inspiration, some of which I lost and need more of.
Well, I think probably my advice for finding musicians to play with would be similar for any age group.
Okay.
And that would be just to go to where the music you like is being played and hang out with those musicians after the show if you can. More and more, I'm learning that one of the most important things you can do for your musical career is just build a network of musicians around you.
Right.
And that just means kind of being friends with people. So go to people's shows that you like, see if you can talk to them afterwards. If you feel awkward about approaching them as you don't have anything to talk about, tell them why you like their music, or maybe ask if it's a fellow guitar player, ask for a lesson, or honestly just ask someone afterwards, say, I'm new to town. For instance, I actually just recently moved to Toronto. Right. So it is it's a strategy, if you will, to go to a show and say, hey, I'm new here. I'd really like to get more involved in the music scene and just ask people if they want to come over and play. Yeah.
Well, the thing is, and this is kind of something that I've found, is when you're talking to other guitar players, because you have that shared passion, most of the time you're going to want to hang out with them and jam anyway. And so I would say, yeah, go to shows where other musicians probably will go to listen to the same music you want to listen to and just start talking to people. You can talk to bands, like you said. I think that's a great idea. I would probably assume some people might be too scared to go and talk to bands. So hopefully some of the people in the crowd might play guitar too, and you can go and hang out with them.
Oh, absolutely, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, that's also another thing. Is a lot of towns have like open mic and jam nights and stuff like that. That's a great place to go. I know they're pretty okay with letting anyone kind of jump up and jam and play. I know in my, like where I live, they have that, I think, weekly at one of the bars there. So that would be a great place to start too.
For sure.
Okay, on to the next thing. This is awesome because Nate's in the other room over there and he sent in some questions because he's greedy. So this one is from Nate. Could you talk a little bit about how you developed your economy picking and how heavy or light your attack on the strings is?
Okay. The first time I did anything intentionally towards economy picking or sweep picking, which is just when you pick sometimes through strings rather than always alternating up and down, was actually a friend of mine. He's a friend of mine now, but at the time we didn't know each other. He just saw me playing something and he said, "Oh, you economy pick." It's like, "Oh, what's that?" So it started doing it accidentally just when I wanted a kind of more legato sound.
Okay.
And I think I even remember the melody. I think it was a Charlie Parker tune called "Scrapple from the Apple," and the first line goes. Sorry, let me turn all the way up here. Couldn't really get, Charlie Parker plays it very fast, and I couldn't really get it to kind of roll off the way I wanted it to kind of sit if I just alternate picked it, like, sorry. Like that.
Right.
I could do it at slower speeds, but so I just found myself kind of naturally pushing through those last three notes, that series of fourths.
Okay.
And then this guy pointed out and said, "Oh, you're doing this thing," and then I looked it up and I think I just read internet forums about it.
Yep.
And then I eventually learned about this guy named Frank Gambale, and so I checked out some of that stuff on YouTube, and one thing led to another.
And would you say that's the technique you use the most? Like you use that a fair amount?
I would say probably half and half with just straight alternate picking.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. I also noticed you do some fingerstyle stuff. There's a few people who are asking about it a little bit. Do you want to maybe just give us a quick example of some of the more fingerstyle-y stuff, like without a pick, that you would play?
Oh, okay, sure.
Put you on the spot.
Sure. I really only switched to fingerstyle for the demands of repertoire.
Okay.
So there's one video that you can conveniently find on my website of me performing a piece by a guitar player who I really like named Ben Wander. Right. And in that video, the piece is written for kind of fingerstyle guitar, but you couldn't really execute it otherwise. Okay. So even if I tried, I couldn't do it with economy picking or alternate picking. Okay. So I was forced to use my right hand and do finger picking style. Okay. And that particular song is actually almost one pattern for the right hand the entire time. And then he just switches between these beautiful harmonies. Right. And then interrupts it with a few smaller things. But the main pattern there is, I think it's a measure of like 21/16 or something. It's this fairly lengthy sort of thing. But the sound of it is this. I'll just play one measure of it. Sure. So there's actually two measures. It starts here. 1, 2, 1, 2. Wow. And the way he creates music out of that is by doing that very fast. And so you can't really tell where things are going, and then he inserts a melody there that starts like... Normally I would play this piece kind of like this so that I can reach those chords. I saw that in the performance video, yeah. One thing I did notice is, and I was going to ask this, but the whole, and I don't know what the specific names are, but people who fingerpick, they use different techniques where sometimes they will like plant their hand while they fingerpick. Oh, okay. And then some people will float their hand. And I noticed you float your hand. I definitely float my hand. Which is like the classical approach. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, that's true. I do have a smattering of classical training in both piano, but guitar I think I took a few lessons in high school, so it might just
Okay.
be residue from those few lessons.
Interesting.
That when I put the guitar that way, I kind of automatically just do that. So
Right.
I honestly haven't really weighed the pros and cons of the two or something like that.
I understand. That makes sense. Yeah, the other one's kind of more akin to like folk music, country music, and things like that.
Okay, right, where you want to have the short sounds.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you also have nails, which is usually more of a
Yes.
classical style thing as well, which is very cool. Okay, onwards. The next question is from S. Resler. What pick thickness is Jacob using?
Okay, well, I'm using a medium thickness pick. That's not that specific. I couldn't tell you more than that, but I actually did recently just switch from a heavy thickness pick to a medium. Again, that's all I know. The one is heavy, the other is medium. I basically did that because I actually recently switched up my right hand technique. I was just telling Andrew Nate earlier.
That's right.
I switched from, it's a subtle difference, but to me it feels like it's changed my world, which is that I used to pick with my right hand wrist more or less against the strings like this.
Right.
And I may even do a little bit of that today,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm working towards shifting my wrist away and having it quite far from the strings, which means that I actually can't mute as easily.
Right.
But in so doing, I think my attack became a little heavier,
Mm-hmm.
and so I wanted to have less resistance from the pick.
That makes sense.
So I switched to a medium gauge.
That makes a lot of sense. That's very interesting. I noticed you pick up near the fretboard as well.
Oh yeah, sort of obscenely far up. If I'm sitting
Yeah.
down, if I'm sitting down, especially, I'll kind of get up here almost.
Is there a reason for that?
I like the sound.
Okay, it's
Yeah.
a tonal thing.
Yeah.
Just you find it just warms it up? Is that kind of thing?
Yeah. There's
Okay.
I kind of go for a sound somewhere between, even on electric guitar, I'm aiming for something between a classical guitar and a steel string guitar.
Interesting.
And so I find that I can get that there. It actually makes it harder to play fast, for instance, because the strings are
Yeah.
more slack there.
Yeah.
So that's a disadvantage, but I find the tonal benefits outweigh
Yes.
that disadvantage.
But you do also play with 12s.
And I play with quite
It
heavy
does
strings.
create more tension.
That's true, yeah.
Yeah.
I thought about that.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Well, one thing, just on the topic of picks, I found it interesting that you just used regular any old picks because Nate and I are total pick nerds, and we spend like $60 on a pick, and I have no problem with
wow.
that. I'm curious as to what your opinion is on different types of picks. Do you think it doesn't matter and it's just thickness that matters, or do you think anything else matters? I'm curious.
I don't know too much about it, but I would guess that probably the first thing is the thickness. Like that's kind of the most meaningful thing. And then from there you can get more specific the more willing you are to just have one pick available to you.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. I used to be, pardon the pun, very picky about it as well.
Yes.
Where it was actually, it wasn't just one type of pick, but there was just one pick that I liked the sound of because it was kind of imperfect.
Right.
Because it had been broken in some way, or like just
Wow,
subtly.
very interesting.
And so
Okay.
I kept it in my pocket for I think like a few years.
Yeah.
And then I lost it and became really torn up about it. And then I realized it's a lot easier just to get used to playing with any pick and sounding as good as you can with anything, than being kind of
Interesting.
having to resort to
Yeah.
very, very particular stuff like
Yeah. So if any of
one
you guys want to start a business, you can make broken picks and sell them to Jake. There you go. No, I find that very interesting because, like I said, Nate and I are total pick nerds, and so it's interesting to hear other people's approach. Okay, next question. We only got a couple more, and then we're going to move on to some other stuff. This one is from M. Ferreira. Hi, I'm new. Where do I go to learn the scales, specifically the ones you suggest we practice C major? Those shapes on the site, I believe there's major scales 1. Your best bet is to go to the lessons section of the site and click on one of the filters, and you can just select lead guitar lessons. And if you just look for lead stuff, you'll find it'll be very obvious there. It'll be under major scales. I believe Nate covers the C major scale in that one. It might be G major scale, but that's basically the one he uses. Now, also in the series that we're doing, that you did today, because you go through it so slowly and there is tabs/sheet music throughout it, it's pretty easy to pick up the shapes that you are using.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, so that would be probably your best bet and what I would recommend. The series, depending on how long it kind of takes for us to get through this stuff and get it edited and stuff, hopefully will be out in a few weeks to a month is kind of what we usually hope for. So once it's out, hopefully then you'll be able to learn all this stuff a lot easier. Because yeah, we move through that stuff.
It's kind of lightning speed. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and also just keep in mind, this will be archived for members and also over on YouTube and over on Facebook. So if you guys kind of missed something, or you came late, or you just wanted to double check something, it'll be available. You can go back and watch it again. So that's no big deal. Okay, we are gonna do one more question, and this one is from Nate. again, which I think is awesome. So how do you make the huge leap from thinking about shapes to thinking about single notes? That seems like a really huge and daunting task. I agree.
That's a really good question. One of the things, I'm not sure this is kind of a universal answer, but it is maybe how I did that, was that the music that I wanted to play and the musicians I wanted to play with thought that way, more or less.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
for instance, if you play with a saxophone player, their instrument is in a different key, which means that if you say, play me a C, the note they play will actually be a different note than C, which is a strange phenomenon indeed,
Right.
and probably deserves some explanation somewhere else. But it means that if you want to talk about the music with someone else, you need to kind of be able to think in more than one key. So I think for me, the reason why I started thinking about notes more than shapes and stuff like that was I wanted to be able to play one song in more than one key. And the easiest way for me to do that was to think about the note names and the harmony involved. I guess you could do that with shapes, but maybe it's more simple than that. Maybe it's just that I really wanted to improvise kind of as freely as I could and be able to hear the kind of chords in my head as I was going. And even though maybe learning the note names is front-loaded work, like it's hard at first,
Yeah.
afterwards, I find it's a very kind of free process. Like I don't think of it as work anymore.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to say where one should make the change, like when you should and that kind of stuff. But for me, I think it was really linked to repertoire.
Okay.
So I started playing a lot of jazz. It was related to the instruments I was playing with saxophone players, trumpet players, even that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And then improvisation generally kind of drove me that way.
Very interesting. That's cool. It's a very different approach. I like it. I said that that was the last question. I totally lied. There's more questions, so we're gonna keep going. Okay, this one's from Les Acadians. Hi, I think I heard Mr. Wiens say he also plays piano. Will you ask him which instrument he is more comfortable with, or does he find one more difficult to play than the other?
I do play piano. I am certainly more comfortable now with the guitar.
Right.
I haven't performed on the piano in many years, probably, but I mostly use it as a pedagogical tool or a compositional tool if I'm writing a piece, that kind of thing.
Okay.
But I would also say that the harder instrument is guitar.
Really?
For sure.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. There's an interesting learning curve that I think is a jazz guitar player named Kurt Rosenwinkel, who in an interview recently kind of articulated it well. I think he said, the guitar is very approachable. You can pick it up and pretty quickly make music. But immediately after that, if you want to start playing like classical guitar repertoire or maybe more involved, like lead solos, that kind of thing, the learning curve just jumps up. And I think one of the reasons is that on the piano, well, this is an often cited reason at least, is that on the piano there's one middle C, but on the guitar there's like numerous positions to play that in, which is exemplified by the kind of exercises I just showed you.
Yeah.
The only reason I could play those scales in such weird ways was because the guitar strings are organized in such a kind of strange
For sure.
route. So
Yeah.
it makes for really interesting affordances and possibilities that the piano doesn't have, but it also requires you think weirdly.
Yeah. Oh, that's very cool. Very cool. Okay, we got one last question here, and this one is from Michael. I've learned my open chords and some blues and minor pentatonic scales, but I'd like to start getting into jazz. What's the best place to start?
I would say the best place to start is to learn the major scale, A major scale, for sure. Not the A major scale, but a single major scale. There you go, that's what I meant.
Okay.
To start opening up other parts of the guitar. But then that last exercise that I did with the 4-chord sequence, the 1-6-2-5 progression, C major 7, A minor 7, D minor 7, G7, learning to arpeggiate those chords, I think is a really great place to start for learning jazz guitar.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay, so that's going to be it for the Q&A. Now, I have some questions of my own for you, things that I want to know. So who are your top 3 influential guitarists?
Okay, well, it's definitely a hard question. I mentioned earlier the guitar player Ben Monder, and I think I do, whether or not I like it, owe a lot to his music. Like, you could probably point to some things in my playing. A stranger could point to them and say, "Oh, that's Ben Monder," and I would have to agree with them.
Yep.
Beyond just playing his music, so I really recommend people check that out. It's really interesting instrumental guitar music.
Okay.
There's kind of a lineage of Canadian guitar players that I really admire. It's not saying lineage is a bit romantic, but there's 3 Canadian guitar players that occupy number 2.
Okay.
If I can cheat that way.
Sure.
Okay. Ed Bickert, Lenny Bro, and a Vancouver guitar player named Ihor Kukuritsa all have, I think, things in common that I kind of identify as this Canadian jazz guitar thing.
Okay.
And they're all beautiful guitar players, and they all have really amazing approaches to harmony on the guitar, so playing chords. And specifically, even more specific than that, they both have this tremendous care for voice leading on the guitar. One of the effects of which is that it often sounds like, for instance, when people would listen to Ed Bickert, even musicians who were playing with them, they would be shocked at how big the chords sounded. Like they sounded thick and dense, like almost like a piano player. But he'd be playing 2 or 3 notes. But it's just the way he voice led in and out of those chords. Voice leading just being how you move one chord to the next. It was just, created this really dense, rich harmonic language.
Interesting.
So those 3 I really like a lot. And then I was just mentioning to Andrew earlier, I think the longest influence for me guitar-wise, the person who I started listening to first and who I still listen to today is definitely Stevie Ray Vaughan. I don't sound like Stevie Ray Vaughan at all, but I do think of myself as having inherited certain things from him, maybe a fondness for clean sounds and stuff.
Okay.
And just the ferocity and the confidence with which he articulates musical phrases are just, it's like very profound.
Yeah, I think everybody can agree with that.
A teacher of mine actually taught me, he was suggesting that I breathe more in my solos.
Yeah.
Kind of just for the sake of creating more lyrical phrases.
Yeah.
We were discussing this a bit earlier.
Yeah, I touched on this in one of our recent live lessons.
Oh, great. And the person he cited for that was watch Stevie Ray Vaughan. And he didn't actually say, listen to Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Okay.
He said, watch some videos and watch how big a breath he takes between each riff.
Yeah.
It's just like, and then he hits the next thing, and it creates this great pause, and it spaces things out nicely, but it also meant that when he was about to hit that thing, he was about to play that line with his entire person was like in that that melody, which is a strange thing to say, but I think is really true.
Yeah, that's very cool. Very cool. I like, those are all over the place. It's good. It's good. I like it. Okay, next question is, what is or has been your biggest struggle on the guitar?
Mm-hmm. Definitely recently, I'm making the switch with my right hand, which I told you about. So right now, that's a sore spot for me.
Okay.
I wish that I can't quite do what I used to, but I know that I want to strengthen this other side of my playing. So it kind of means making yourself worse before you can get better.
Right.
So that's just a current thing. The constant struggle of my guitar playing, and that I think a lot of other musicians I know struggle with, or a goal to which they aim that seems maybe impossible sometimes, is when improvising, really truly only playing what you're hearing in your head and not kind of just going with maybe muscle memory or patterns that you've memorized, but really kind of pausing and waiting. It's a strange thing to say again, but to wait until you hear something in your mind and then to accurately play that thing on the guitar is a phenomenally complicated task.
Right.
But one that's tremendously satisfying to play.
Yeah.
And sometimes I cheat myself and I do other things and I feel less satisfied. So sticking to that, being kind of the fidelity to that process of playing what you hear is definitely a challenge.
Okay, very cool. And then the last question I have for you is to recommend one album that you think every guitar player needs to listen to.
I was sort of prepped with these questions before and I still don't have an answer to this question. I mean, if it's Stevie Ray Vaughan, probably Texas Flood is the one I know the best. So that's a great place to start.
Absolutely.
Maybe I'll just go down the list of people I mentioned. Ben Wander has a bunch of really great records.
Okay.
Oceana is a great one. It's interesting. Well, I don't want to go on too long about this. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Ben Wander's work in particular, I really appreciate his guitar playing on his own records. But if you can find records where he's a sideman, I actually really enjoy that as much or even more, where he's not in charge of the project.
Right.
It means that the tunes aren't his, but he adopts a somewhat more, at least to my ears, a more kind of playful approach to his improvisation, and the solos are really great.
Okay, very cool.
So maybe I'll just leave it at that. Oceana, Ben Wander, anything he's a sideman on, and then Texas Flood.
There we go. So that's a little more than one, but we'll allow it.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
Yeah, you cheated almost every rule that we've set up beforehand, but I like it. I'm totally okay with it. Okay, one other thing that we wanted to start doing, especially now that it's not just Nate and I in here, is we wanted to kind of do something that we kind of are going to affectionately call tone recipe. And that is the gear that you're playing through and what you're using. And I just wanted to quickly, maybe you could just kind of take the floor and just quickly talk about the gear that you're using or what you would typically use.
Absolutely. So I would typically use this guitar. And this guitar is a Gibson ES340, 1969. Yeah. And, well, that's all I'll say about it. It's my only instrument. Well, it's my only guitar. And I like it quite a bit.
Yeah.
On the floor here, I don't think we can see it right now, but I'll just quickly run down aloud what I have. I have a compressor, which is the Origin Effects Cali 76. I actually have one of the old big box ones before they made the compact series.
Yep.
It's really great though, I like it a lot, even if it takes up a lot of board space.
It's worth it.
I have an EQ made by Empress Effects, which actually is an incredibly valuable pedal, but very subtle. Like it's really just a kind of adjust knobs, tiny amounts, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Then I have a fuzz pedal, the Proco Rat, and it's a big box Rat with the JHS mod.
Yeah.
That's my only gain pedal on the board right now and pretty much always, which is kind of strange.
Yeah.
I have a boost pedal made by Vertex Effects. It's just a clean boost. You set how much you want it to boost your signal. Yeah. You stomp on it and it does the job. I guess the interesting point there is that it really doesn't make your guitar sound different, just louder, which is its winning feature. Then I have a delay pedal made by MXR, a very popular delay pedal called the Carbon Copy. Yep. Probably its distinguishing feature, there we go, is that the delay trails are quite dark sounding. Yep. And that I like a lot, actually. Yep. Yeah. Then I have a little polytune, make sure that I'm in tune. And lastly, I have a reverb pedal made by Context. Made by Red Panda. The reverb pedal is called Context.
Okay, I'd never heard of that one before. So
really?
This was the one that surprised me, because everything else I've heard of, but that one I definitely haven't. It sounds very good.
Yeah, I like it quite a bit. Yeah. And then I'm playing through actually Andrew's amp, and it's a Dr. Z EZG 50.
Yes. What would you normally play for an amp?
I would probably play something like, well, recently I was playing a string of shows in BC, and I just rented the deluxe reverb, excuse me.
Okay, yeah.
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 So something like a twin or smaller in that kind of Fender.
And you kind of said you like the 60s blackface era kind of Fender amps. Yeah.
And you can get that from a number of amps for sure. So I'm not too picky about it.
But you kind of just like big and clean kind of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Very cool. What kind of strings do you use?
I used D'Addario 12s.
Okay,
round wounds.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Basically, my reason for doing so is it's the heaviest set of strings that I can find where the G string is plain and not wound.
Yeah, which surprised me. I actually assumed you would use a wound G, being someone who plays jazz. You hear about that a lot. I
really don't like it, so I don't use it.
Yeah, I've tried it before, and it was absolutely terrible, so I understand.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay, well, very cool. Before we kind of wrap things up, I do see one more question, and I kind of want to get to it because I kind of would feel bad if we left this one unread. This one's from Evan Thompson, and he wants to know, what about motifs versus sequencing?
Motifs versus sequencing. I think there's beautiful examples of players who do both. One predominantly. Like players who often play kind of lines, sequences, stuff like that, and it's great. And players who do kind of more motivic playing, and it's great. I think I strive personally to side towards the motivic playing. I probably fail at doing that a lot, but it to me, actually at the moment, it to me is harder than playing kind of lines, and so that's part of its attraction is I want to be able to do it. Yeah. I understand that. No, that's a good answer. I like that a lot. Okay, well, next week, Jacob won't be here, but we will be doing kind of actually similar, practicing and setting goals, and that'll be Nate and I back again. So that'll be next Tuesday, July 18th at 4 p.m. And we're gonna kind of take a little bit more of a top-down view on practicing, setting goals, kind of what to do. A lot of people ask, what the heck should I practice? When they're first picking up the guitar even, and that's something that we kind of wanted to take some time to talk about, so we'll be doing that next week. So Jake, thank you for coming out. Thanks so much for having me.
Where can people go to find you?
People can find me at my website, which is simply www.jacobwiens.com. I am also on I guess I have personal profile stuff on Facebook and Twitter and
Okay.
Instagram, but my music can be found at that website.
Mainly on your website.
Yeah.
Okay, very cool. Well, guys, thank you so much for coming out, and we will see you guys later.
Thanks.